What's up, guys? How are we doing? Before I get into my video, just a major shout out to everyone who has supported my first video and my venture into YouTube, for all the kind comments and constructive feedbacks. And do know that even though I may not have, applied some of the ideas in my upcoming videos, that I'm always keeping an eye for it and, taking those feedbacks into consideration. So, let's get back to me detailing my story after graduation. So this is the part two. If you haven't watched the part one, I would highly recommend for you to watch part one before you get here, right? So part two, where we're going to pick back off, is that one thing that I did realize from my part one is I sort of glossed over a couple of things with regards to my first employment. And if you guys know, I talked about me joining this agricultural company and things not going so well. So what happened was that I joined this company in September 2017 after I graduated around July 2017. And when I first joined the company, I was asked to report to two bosses. And reporting to two bosses is always very tricky. It's a red flag. But in the case of this organization, it sort of worked well for me. So I was reporting under two bosses. And some of the projects that I was working on, so one boss gave me a project of working on like investigating how we could fasten the process of fruit ripening, so the ripening of oil palm fruits. And I was doing some research, and we were researching of how ethylene could be used to promote even ripening across the entire fruit, because it's not only that we want to fasten the process, but it's also evenly distributing that process across the entire palm oil fruit. That was one of the projects that I worked on, and the other one was irrigation method. So irrigation is a way in which we provide water to the plants. So there were many different types, like the most conventional type, the sprinkler irrigation, where they sprinkle water, but then in terms of efficiency, it might not be the greatest. So we were sort of going for trying to see this technology of drip irrigation by this Israeli manufacturer called Netafim. So I was working a lot with them, right? And that was going pretty decent. Back to the fruit ripening project, this was the one that they asked me to do a presentation on at the end of my project. So if there is one thing that I pride myself on, is my ability to be able to present, right? I'm not going to flex and show you like all my trophies, but I've been doing this for a very long time, like, representing my school for public speaking. So it's years and years of practice. If there's anything that I pride myself on, it's my ability to public speak or to present. And here I am presenting about, all my findings. I have my slideshow up, right? And I have all the managers and the senior agronomists just waiting there. And while I was doing my presentation, this guy who was, to be fair, he was one of the most, if not the most senior agronomist in attendance. And I was presenting, I was going through my slides, and I looked back at the audience, and this guy was literally like this, like this. His head was tilted so much to the back that I couldn't even see it. And that just spoke volumes on, I feel, how much this man regarded or respected me presenting, right? And I sort of can see it from his point, because he's like, man, I've been spending years in the plantations and I know half of the things that this guy is talking about. And he's trying to, go on Google and give me things that I already know. So maybe he's thinking of it from that perspective. But when I look back, it really hit my confidence to see someone just straight out sleeping. I don't think he was snoring, but he was straight out like gone, man. But those who listened, they appreciated it. So I had a few people come up to me and say, man, good presentation. So things were going well. I was working on a few items with the big boss, and even that, I did all those small items to the best of my ability. And that's one thing that I feel I learned as well. And if I can provide any advice to the people who are young in the workforce, is that even though, sometimes your manager may give you a task that is not seen to be the most groundbreaking, right? That if you take that seriously, I think those are the ones that will really earn their trust in you. So that went well, and the news hit me so suddenly, right, that my time in the company was coming to an end, and they didn't see that value in having me stay with them. I remember being very down. I told my parents, of course, and typically when I come back, I sort of talk with them about what things transpired in the workspace. And that day I felt so down that just walked straight into my room, which is, where I'm recording. And it's funny in these times where my mind always defaults to what's the worst thing that could possibly happen, right? Like, oh my God, I don't know how my career is going. When I look back in 2023 of the thing that happened in 2017, that was just like a ripple in an ocean. But at that point, it was like, my entire world had come to an end, right? Where must I relocate to somewhere far, in the outskirts of Malaysia? And all those sort of thoughts were coming into my head. And the trickiest thing is, after they deliver that news, right? After you know that your contract is no longer going to be extended, you still have to put that professional cap on and go to work and face these guys. And of course, the news started going and everyone's looking at you slightly differently. You sort of go into that defensive mode where you think like everything is related to that, right? So here I am. I'm just sitting in my table, just contemplating, right, doing my work, and then, right, this happens. So remember in the first part, in the first video, when I told you all that I worked on this, my magnum opus and this design project to do with soluble coffee processing, I was sitting in my place as usual, and it was a very small office. Right opposite me was this Chinese lady who was on her headset, and she was talking with someone. And then I was hearing terms that I knew of. So she was talking about Arabica and Robusta, which are types of coffee beans, right? And I knew all of this because I had worked on that project. So I'm hearing her talk about Arabica, Robusta, extraction, 70% aroma. We got to send this roasting levels. And I was like, man, the first thing that crossed my mind was that, because I've seen this lady before, but I've never really engaged in a proper conversation with her. So I was like, wait, we are in a palm and rubber office. Why in the dickens is this lady talking about soluble coffee? That sparked that curiosity. So I waited for her call to end, and then I approached her. And shout out to her, man. I'm not gonna mention her name, but she knows who she is. If I ever get that famous that she watches this video, shout out to you. So I asked her. She was very, very pleasant. So I asked her, how come, why are you talking about coffee? And then she mentioned that she was working for the coffee division of that same company. So that agricultural company is huge. They deal with a wide variety of crops. So palm and rubber was just one faction of the entire company. And so she was from the coffee division. But that company had two soluble coffee processing plants. So one in Vietnam and one in Spain. So the question was, why is she in KL here? And it's because this lady was very sought after, and she was basically found by a headhunter. She was able to tell the people that she wanted to be based in KL to support her very young kid. And she was a business development manager, right? When she was telling me this, I was like, I did this whole project on soluble coffee processing, and that is why a lot of the things that you were talking about, I resonated with and I knew. And immediately when she heard that, these are the types of people who are just so opportunistic, in the most positive way that can mean. She was like, Colin, give me your project, right? Give me your design project. I'm gonna shoot an email to my top bosses. Not many people would do that. So shout out to you, right? Thinking the best of it, I send her my project. And immediately she sends my project to her top boss, who I really am not sure who this person is at that point, right? In half an hour's time, she gets a call and then she talks and then she stands up from her seat so I can see her and she says, she points to me like, come here and someone wants to talk to you. So I come over to a seat and I get on the phone and this is the top boss, who has just gotten the email and he has very quickly gone through my design project. Like he's the president of the coffee division of this company. There's a certain excitement that I got out of his voice. He was telling me, I saw your project. It looks amazing. You did this. He couldn't believe that I did this while I was in uni. He immediately just cut straight to the point. We are interested in having you, but I've just got to work on a few things because, as you know, our sites are in Vietnam and in Spain. And if we want to hire you, you have to be based at one of the sites. So imagine the emotions that were running in my mind. It was like, I'm just here and I've practically lost my job. And now this guy from the coffee division, which is one of the most profitable divisions in the company, is now wanting me in his team, right? For all the hip hop aficionados that is listening to me, the best sort of analogy I can put is Tupac when he came out of prison and it's like joining death row. He was in prison, he was down and out. I'm not comparing myself to Tupac, but it's just the way I think about it. It's like he came and Suge Knight wanted him on death row, which was at that point hip hop's leading label. Everything that they put out were classics. So it was that vibe, right? He said, send me your CV and you can CC your current boss as well. And this is another props to my current boss, right? When I told him of the opportunity, he knew how much that meant to me and he said he gave me his full blessings. And another thing about this opportunity which I really appreciated was that all those years that I spent in uni, all those nights doing that design project, it was finally worth the while, all the efforts, because it was the design project that basically got me that job. So for everyone who's, in uni listening to me, like, don't skimp out on that design project, man. Don't skimp out on that. So I send him my CV and then I don't hear from him for a long time, right? And I'm sitting like, yo, my time is running out because it was February 2018, was supposed to be my last month. So my time is running out, and my current boss is like, yo, have you reached out to them? So I reach out again and he says, I am going to schedule an interview with you, but he was not more on the technical side. So he got the technical guy to interview me, right? So on the day of the interview, I basically had this whole room to myself and I was sharing screen on the projector. And this guy who is super senior, I think he had 30 plus years of experience in the soluble coffee processing industry. And his face just comes up on the huge screen, right? I'm like, man, is this guy gonna toast me? Because the thing with the design project is that we all know, I'm speaking to all chemical engineering students, we all know that half of the equations that we come up with in that design project didn't make sense at all. Like for me personally, I was designing vessels and percolators at the height of KLCC, man. And to make it make sense, I would add like a constant in the design project and I would reference that constant from a book that you couldn't get on Google. so that there was no way of tracking it. And when you added that constant, that I don't know how many hundreds meters vessels that I ended up with were shrunk to 5 meters. So we all knew the amount of BS that went into that design project. Now, there was a lot of BS in my design project, but the presentation and the way I went about it was it was legit. And I think they bought it. And this guy, credits to this technical guy who was interviewing me for the job. You know how some people, they will try and nitpick and find fault in you, and he could have very well done that. But I think he more so just asked me very basic questions that I sort of knew. And I got the sense that he was impressed by what he said. Whatever he said that I couldn't answer, I was very, very straight up and I was very honest with him. I got the sense that I got the job, and yeah, in the few days' time, I received the offer letter. So here I was in one division, I was sort of like the forgotten child, and I was asked to leave. And then in the next minute, the most profitable division sort of comes in and wants me in their team, right? So I became like almost like the talk of the office. And even when I left the office, like people used to tell me like, yo man, like we are still talking about you. Like people still talk about what happened. And the day when I got the offer letter and I was just seeing it, because it was an expat assignment. So this is my first job, and it was an expat assignment in Vietnam. And the perks that came with it, and even the salary was like, I'm not sure how many years I've had to work to build up to get that salary. It was such a huge jump in the salary, and it was like everything was aligned. The only thing was that I had this perception of Vietnam and how I was going to settle in there, given that there's a language barrier. But at that point, man, I was filled with this sense of bravado. Like I finally did it. I got this job, which is engineering. It's something related to what I did in university and how things turned around. So yeah, there started my journey and my life in Vietnam, which I will go through in part 3. Anyone who has been following me on Instagram in the years of 2017, 2018 will still, till this day, bring up things that I shared about, through my experience in Vietnam. And I will go to it more in depth in part 3, right? So stick around.